On a cold October afternoon in 1881, a small girl stepped down off a train in Montana Territory, carrying a worn leather valise and a sealed envelope from a Boston marriage agency. She had made her mark on a 4-page contract 3 months before. She did not know what she had signed. She could not read a single word of it. The man waiting on that platform saw the truth the moment she held the paper upside down in his wagon. He could have laughed. He could have used it against her. He did neither. That night, by the light of his fire, he did something no one had ever done for her in her entire life. He read it to her, every word, slowly. And what happened next changed 2 lives, 1 small town, and 8 women the world had forgotten. Welcome to our channel, where we bring you stories of the American West. Stories of cowboys and homesteaders, of hard land and harder winters, of love found on open prairies, of the quiet bond between a mother and a child, and of the simple human kindness that saves one soul at a time. This story will remind you of a truth we too often forget: that the worth of a human being is never measured by what she can read on a page. It is measured by whether one single person is willing to sit beside her and read it for her, as if she deserves to understand. That is where dignity lives. That is where love begins. If this story moves your heart the way it moved ours, please take one quiet moment to hit the like button. Leave a comment telling us where you are listening from. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it tonight, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next one. Your support is the reason we keep telling these stories. Now, settle in, pour yourself something warm, and let me take you back to the Montana Territory on a Thursday afternoon in October of the year 1881.
The cold came early that year in Montana Territory. Silas Hartwell stood on the platform of the Silver Bend station on a Thursday afternoon in October. The sleeves of his leather coat were dusty from the long road down from the ranch. In the breast pocket of that coat, folded twice over, there was a marriage contract of 4 pages. He put his hand against his chest just to feel the paper was still there. Not because he feared losing it, because he was trying to get used to the idea that his life, after 3 years of nothing but silence and dust, was about to change on account of a paper he had signed with a woman he had never met. The train whistle called from the north. His little sister, Hannah, stood beside him. She was 8 years old. She wore the blue dress that had gone tight at the shoulders because he had not known how to let it out. Her small hand gripped his big one. She looked up at him and asked, for the 4th time that day, "Silas, is she going to know how to read me stories?" He did not answer right away. He looked down at the crown of her head. He looked at the black braid he had tied clumsily because he did not have the knack. He thought, "I do not know, Hannah. I only know I signed a paper, and a woman is coming out here on account of that paper." Then the train pulled in. Steam hissed against the platform boards. A few passengers stepped down out of the passenger car. Silas scanned the faces. The girl was not what he had expected. He had pictured a woman of 30, a widow perhaps, somebody who had done hard time in a Boston mill. What came down the iron steps of the car was a small girl with auburn curls tucked under a gray cloth bonnet. She carried a worn leather valise in one hand and a sealed envelope in the other. She could not have been more than 22 years of age. She looked at him. She looked at Hannah. She crossed the platform slowly. "Mr. Hartwell?" she said. Her voice was low and careful, with a faint lilt of old Ireland in it. "I am," Silas said. "This is my sister, Hannah." "I am Eleanor Callahan," the girl said, "but my people always called me Nora." She held out the envelope. He opened it. Inside was her copy of the contract, and a letter from Mrs. Edith Briggs of the Briggs Matrimonial Agency, confirming that Eleanor Callahan, age 22, orphaned, healthy, of good temperament, had been engaged as the bride of Silas Hartwell of Silver Bend. He refolded the letter. He nodded. "The wagon is this way," he said. "Let me take your bag. Take your soul." She hesitated. Then she let him take it. It weighed almost nothing. Whatever Nora Callahan owned in this world, she had brought out here in one hand. On the wagon ride home, with Hannah seated between them on the plank seat, Silas said, "I thought it might be best before we go to the courthouse in the morning that you look over the contract once more. You may have questions." The girl was quiet for a long while. Then she nodded. He reached into his coat. He drew out his copy. He handed it across to her. And in the first second, Silas saw that Nora Callahan was holding the paper upside down. The letters were reversed. She did not know. He said nothing. He only felt something in his chest that was very old and very familiar. It felt a great deal like the afternoon 3 years before, when he'd come home 4 hours too late and Mary Ellen was already gone. Somebody else needs me, he thought, and I am already almost too late. He turned his eyes back to the road. The October sun was going down over the low hills. The wagon wheels made their small, steady sound on the rutted dirt. Hannah, after a quiet mile, tilted her face up to the stranger beside her. "Do you like to read books, Miss Nora?" Nora looked down at her small hands. She smiled. It was a careful, quiet smile. "I like to hear other people read, honey, more than I like to read myself." Silas heard her. He did not turn his head, but he had already decided, right there on that wagon, that tonight, after Hannah was in bed, he would take that contract out by the fire, and he would read it to her, word by word. Not because the law required it, because no one else in her life was ever going to. He did not know yet. He could not know yet that this one small decision was the thing that would change his life. They reached the ranch at dusk. The house was a 2-story timber building. The paint had gone gray from weather. A single lamp was already burning in the kitchen window. Silas had left it burning for her. He had not wanted her to arrive in the dark. He showed her a small room on the upper floor. He said, "You will sleep here. I sleep downstairs in the room off the kitchen. You do not have to worry about anything else." Nora thanked him. Her voice was so soft he was not sure he heard her. She closed the door. She sat on the edge of the bed, and for about 3 minutes she wept, quietly, because for the first time in 12 years there was a room that was her own, and she had not paid for it by keeping her head bowed. Supper was potato soup with salt pork. Silas set 3 plates. He pulled out her chair. He cut Hannah's bread without being asked. Nora ate slowly. She did not dare eat much. After the meal, Hannah went up to bed. Nora and Silas washed the dishes together without speaking. When they were finished, Silas took the contract from his coat pocket. He laid it on the kitchen table. He pulled 2 chairs close to the fire in the parlor. "Miss Callahan," he said. His voice was low and clear and without hurry. "I'm going to read this contract to you. Every word of it. I want you to know what you signed. If there is anything here you do not agree with, I will tear this paper up tonight, and you are welcome to stay in this house as my guest, owing nothing, until I can put you back on a train to Boston with the fare and with a letter of recommendation." Nora went very still. She understood in that moment that he had known. He had known from the first second in the wagon when she held the paper upside down. And he had not laughed. He had not asked. He had not pitied her. He had only offered to read. She sat down. She could not speak. "Article 1, Silas began, and he read. He read slowly. He stopped after every clause. He explained each one in plain language. He said, "This clause means that if I die before you do, 1/3 of the ranch passes to you, the rest to Hannah." He read the next clause, and the next. When he reached the clause that spoke of a wife's marital obligations, he stopped the longest of all. He said, "I struck that clause out before I sent the paper back to the agency. You will see the line drawn through it. I am not buying you, Miss Callahan. I am offering you a partnership. If there is a day when you choose otherwise, that will be your choice, not the paper's." He read to the last word. He signed the paper again in front of her. He passed her the pen. She made her X. Her hand trembled a little. But for the first time in her life, Nora Callahan made her mark knowing exactly what she had agreed to. The fire crackled in the grate. Outside, the October wind moved over the yard. Inside, a man and a woman sat across a small table from each other, and one of them had just been read aloud to for the first time in her life by a person who did not want anything in return. Silas folded the contract back up. He said, "Welcome to the Hartwell Ranch, Mrs. Callahan. I will see you in the morning for breakfast." Nora nodded. Her eyes were wet. She could not speak. She climbed the stairs to her small room. She did not sleep for a long time. She lay awake in the dark, listening to the house settle around her, and she listened to the faint sound of Silas Hartwell moving around downstairs, banking the fire for the night. And she thought for the first time in 12 years, maybe the world is not entirely a place where a woman like me has to pay for every breath. Then she slept. The morning brought cold blue sunshine. Silas rose before dawn and fed the livestock. By the time Nora came down the stairs, there was fresh bread on the table and coffee on the stove, and a boiled egg on a plate. Silas was already in his coat. He nodded to her. He said, "Eat first, Mrs. Callahan, then we ride to the courthouse." Nora ate. Hannah came down in the blue dress. She asked Nora to braid her hair, and Nora did it, fingers moving quick and sure, a much tidier braid than Silas had ever managed. Hannah looked up at her. "It feels different," the child said. "Does it hurt?" Nora asked. "No, it just feels like somebody cared about it." Nora's hands paused for just a moment over the ribbon. Then she tied the bow. At the county courthouse in Silver Bend, Judge Ezra Whitmore signed the marriage certificate. He was an old man with a white beard and tired eyes. Nora made her X. Silas signed his name. Judge Whitmore peered at them both over his spectacles. He said to Nora, "Young lady, do you understand what you have just done?" Silas answered before Nora could. He said, "I read the contract to her last night, Your Honor, word by word. She understands." Judge Whitmore looked at Silas for a long moment, then he nodded. He said, "Mr. Hartwell, not many men in this territory would have done that. You are a credit to your father's name." They rode back to the ranch. They ate a midday meal of bread and cheese, and neither of them said very much. That night, by the fire, Silas did a thing Nora Hartwell would remember the rest of her life. He took out a fresh sheet of paper. He said, "I'm going to write down the agreement between the two of us, not the one the agency wrote. This one is between you and me. I will read every line aloud as I write it. You have the right to add, to take away, to refuse." He wrote, and he read as he wrote. First, Nora has a room of her own for the first 30 days. After that, if she wishes a change, the choice is hers and only hers. Second, Nora takes charge of the kitchen, the garden, and Hannah. For that work, I pay her $15 a month, not as a hired hand, as a partner whose labor is acknowledged. Third, if after 90 days Nora wishes to leave this place, I pay her rail fare back to Boston, and I write her a letter of recommendation, no questions asked. He reached the fourth line. He paused. He looked into the fire for a long moment. Then he wrote slowly. Fourth, every night after supper, if Nora wishes it, Silas will read aloud to her, whatever she wishes to hear. Letters, scripture, books, newspapers, recipes. Not to teach her to read, only to read to her. No charge, no debt to be repaid. He passed the paper across the table. Nora took it. She held it a long time. Then she said very softly, "May I add one?" "You may." "I would like to teach Hannah to sing. My mother was a church singer in Dublin before she came over. I know a great many songs. It is the only thing I have to trade." Silas wrote the fifth clause. Nora made her X. Silas signed his name. And that night, not the night before and not the night after, but that very night, Silas opened the Hartwell family Bible, and he read Psalm 23 aloud to her. She closed her eyes. She heard the words, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want," and for the first time in 12 years, she believed them. The first 3 weeks at the Hartwell Ranch went by as fast as 3 days. Nora learned to milk the Jersey cow named Maybelle. On the first morning, Silas stood behind her, guiding her hands on the teats. When his fingers brushed hers by accident, he pulled back faster than he needed to. Nora noticed. Nora said nothing. In the second week, old Caleb Thornton, the longtime ranch hand, burned his forearm while fixing the iron of the forge. Caleb was 60 years old. He had been a widower for 10 years. Nora packed the burn with wild plantain leaf, rendered mutton fat, and honey. Caleb was astonished. He asked her, "Where did you learn that, Mrs. Hartwell?" Nora blushed at Mrs. Hartwell. It was the first time anyone had called her that. She said, "Mrs. Mahoney, in Boston. She raised me from the age of 12 to 18. In the third week, Hannah came down with a high fever. Nora sat up with the child 2 nights in a row, sponging the small forehead with a cool cloth, singing Gaelic lullabies, spooning chamomile tea past the pale lips. On the second night, Nora fell asleep in the chair beside the bed. When she woke near dawn, Silas was standing in the doorway. How long he had been there, she did not know. His eyes were red. He said nothing. He laid a wool blanket over her shoulders and went back down the stairs. Each evening by the fire, Silas read. The first week, he read scripture. The second week, Nora asked to hear Little Women, a book she had seen on a Boston mistress's shelf, but had never heard read aloud. Silas read Little Women for 7 nights. When he reached the chapter where Beth March dies, Nora wept without a sound. Silas laid the book on his knee. He said, "I can read something else if you would prefer." Nora shook her head. "No. Go on. I need to hear the end of it." On the 21st night, Hannah's fever broke. The child threw her small arms around Nora in the kitchen and called her, for the first time, Miss Nora. Not yet Mama, but something close. Nora held the child tight. Nora did not cry. Nora only smiled and sang a soft verse of Danny Boy in Gaelic. Silas stood in the kitchen doorway. This time he stayed. And when Hannah let Nora go to run to the bucket for a cup of milk, Silas stepped into the kitchen and stood across the table from Nora and said, his voice a little rough, "Thank you for coming." Nora nodded. She could not speak. Somewhere inside her chest, after 12 years of being lost, something had finally come home. Trouble, when it came to the Hartwell Ranch, did not come shouting. It came dressed in a clean black coat, carrying a loaf of bread. Pastor Josiah Callahan of the Silver Bend Presbyterian Church was 52 years old. He was thin, his hair had gone white early. His coat was threadbare, but always clean. He had been the pastor of that church for 18 years. He had buried Silas Hartwell's first wife, Mary Ellen, 3 years before. He had baptized Hannah Hartwell at the age of 4 months. He was not the enemy of any man in that valley. Pastor Callahan was not a wicked man. That was the hardest part of what was coming. Pastor Callahan believed, with all the honest weight of his faith, that a Christian woman who could not read her Bible was a soul in peril. He believed that a child raised by such a woman was a child whose spirit was being starved. That was the truth inside his head. It was not malice. It was prejudice. And sometimes sincere prejudice is more dangerous than malice because the man who carries it sleeps well at night. Pastor Callahan rode out to the ranch on the 4th Sunday of Nora's time there. He brought a loaf of bread. He sat in the parlor. He drank the tea Nora poured him. And then, from the inside pocket of his coat, he drew out a small leather New Testament. And he said softly, almost kindly, "Mrs. Hartwell, I should very much like to hear you read the first chapter of the book of Ruth, verse 16. A lovely passage for a new bride. Whither thou goest, I will go." Nora's face went pale. Hannah, playing in the corner with a wooden horse, looked up at her. Silas stood up from his chair. His voice was level, but his gray eyes had gone dark. He said, "My wife is tired this morning, Pastor. I will read the passage in her place, if you like." Pastor Callahan smiled, a sad, real smile. He nodded. He listened to Silas read. When Silas was finished, Pastor Callahan stood, thanked Nora for the tea, and walked to the door. There, without looking at Nora, only at Silas, he said, "The church council meets on Wednesday next. I'm afraid I must raise my concerns about Hannah. A child needs a mother who can read scripture to her, Silas. That is not cruelty. That is our duty before the Lord," he rode off. Silas stood on the porch a long while after the wagon had gone over the hill. When he came back inside, he did not speak of it. He only said, "Supper." But that night, after Hannah was in bed, Silas did not open the Bible. He opened a law book. He said, "Nora, tonight I'm going to read you something else. I'm going to read you the 14th Amendment of the Constitution of the United States, and I'm going to explain what it means." He read the words, slowly. He said, "This clause here, the Equal Protection Clause, means this. You are a citizen of this country, Nora Callahan Hartwell. Not because you can read your Bible, not because you can sign your name. You are a citizen because you breathe the same air that I breathe, and the air that Pastor Callahan breathes, and the air that President Garfield breathes in Washington. Nobody has the authority to take that away from you. Not a preacher, not a sheriff, not me, not anybody living." Nora listened. She did not say a word. But that night, lying in the small upstairs room, she learned a thing that Mrs. Mahoney had not lived long enough to teach her. She had human rights, and those rights did not depend on whether she could read a printed page. She turned it over in her mind. A citizen. The word felt too big for her. It felt like a coat made for a bigger woman. And yet Silas had said it plain, as if it belonged to her, as if it had always belonged to her, and nobody had told her. She fell asleep thinking of the word. On the Tuesday after Pastor Callahan's visit, 3 days before the church council was to meet, trouble of another kind came riding hard. Thomas Brennan, the son of the neighbor 3 miles to the east, came up the wagon road at 4 in the afternoon on a lathered horse. He was white in the face. "Mr. Hartwell," he shouted, before he had even reined in. "Dr. Samuel Hollis has been gone to Billings 3 days. My father was kicked in the chest by the bay mare this morning. He is coughing up blood. Please, for God's sake, help us." Silas started pulling on his coat. Nora stepped forward. She untied her apron. She said in a voice that did not shake, in a voice Silas had not heard from her before, "I am going." Silas looked at her. She said, "I worked under Dr. Edward Hollis of Boston from the age of 13 to 18. Mrs. Mahoney placed me there. I have seen 63 broken rib cases. I have seen 17 punctured lungs. I know how to read the signs. If it is a punctured lung, we have about 2 hours before he dies. We will have to draw the air off the lung with a reed." Silas nodded once. He said, "Then we go together." Nora worked on old Ezekiel Brennan for 2 hours straight. She read the signs the way another woman reads a book. 3 broken ribs, 1 driven into the lung, a mild tension of air inside the chest cavity. She called for boiled water, clean linen, a hollow reed which she used where a surgical tube should have been. She drew the trapped air out of the chest. She splinted the ribs. She kept old Ezekiel Brennan talking by asking him about his late wife. She sat up through the night with him, awake, watching the rise and fall of his breath. Dr. Samuel Hollis rode back from Billings the next morning. He examined Ezekiel Brennan, and then, out on the porch, he said plainly to Silas and to the Brennan family, "If your wife had not been here last night, Ezekiel Brennan would have been dead by midnight. I could not have done a better job than she did. That woman has saved a man's life." On the wagon ride back to the Hartwell ranch, Silas drove slowly. He did not ask. Nora told him herself. She told him about Mrs. Mahoney, the old Irish nurse who had lived in 2 rooms in the Fort Hill district of Boston. The nurse had taken Nora in at 12 after her mother died of consumption. She had taught her everything except reading. She had placed her with Dr. Edward Hollis at Massachusetts General at the age of 13. Nora had been at that hospital for 5 years. She had seen hundreds of births, hundreds of wounds, hundreds of lives lost, and hundreds saved. When Mrs. Mahoney died the year Nora turned 18, the hospital did not keep her. "We cannot pay wages," the administrator had told her, "to a girl who cannot read a prescription." She was put out on the street. She went into domestic service. The mistress died. She was put out on the street again. Then she went to the Briggs Matrimonial Agency. She finished, her voice oddly calm. "I can heal the human body, Mr. Hartwell. I simply cannot read the words that people write about the human body. And because of that, the world has been telling me for 10 years that I have no worth." Silas stopped the wagon. He turned to face her. He said, not out of politeness, not out of pity, but as if he were only stating a plain fact he had only just this moment seen clearly. The world told you wrong, Nora. You are worth the whole city of Boston. And on Wednesday, I am going to say so before the church council. She wept. The second time in her life in front of a man. He did not touch her. He only waited until she was done. Then he drove them home through the dusk. That night, Silas could not sleep. He lay on the narrow bed in the room off the kitchen, and he thought about his wife upstairs. His wife. The word felt new to him. It had been 3 years since he had used it about any living woman. And now, there was a woman under his roof who had saved an old man's life with her hands, who had sung his sister to sleep, who had not once asked him for a thing she had not earned. He thought about Pastor Callahan. He thought about the church council meeting 2 days off. He thought about what he was going to say, and he thought, for the first time in a long time, of Mary Ellen. He thought of her without the old knife in his chest. He thought, Mary Ellen, you would have liked this woman. You would have liked her a great deal. He slept. The night before the church council, the rain came hard against the roof of the ranch house. Nora and Silas sat by the fire as they had every night. Hannah was asleep upstairs. Silas did not bring the Bible. He brought a fresh sheet of paper and a pen. Nora, he said, tonight I am not going to read. Tonight, if you will allow it, I am going to teach you to write your name, only your name, no promises attached. Nora shook her head. Silas, I have tried. Mrs. Mahoney tried for 6 years. The letters dance in front of me. My eyes cannot hold them still. Silas nodded. He said, I know. I read a paper last year from a doctor in London. He called this condition word blindness. There is a disorder of the eye and the mind, where the letters do not stay where they were put. It is not slowness, Nora. Your mind simply sees letters differently from mine. But you can still learn. Not through the eye, through the hand. He took her small hand. He placed it on the paper. He guided her index finger in the shape of the letter. This is the letter N. 2 lines down, 1 line across between them. Listen to me, Nora. This letter is the beginning of your name. This letter is you. Then the letter O. Round like the moon, like the sound you make when you whistle for Maybelle the cow. Then the letter R. A line down, a loop at the top, a tail kicking out sideways, like somebody walking, stubborn, like you. Then the letter A. Then the letter N again. But that time Nora caught herself. She said softly, No, Silas. There is no second N at the end of my name. The next letter must be a different one. Silas looked at her. He said, That is right, Nora. I put that second N there on purpose. I wanted to see if you would catch it. You did. Nora wrote, slowly, unevenly. Her tears fell onto the paper and blurred one of the letters, but she wrote the word Nora. She looked up at him. She said, This is the first time in my life I have signed my name with anything other than an X. Silas did not answer. He took both of her hands in his own. He placed them against his chest, over his heart. He did not kiss her. He only held her hands there, and he said very softly, You have written your name, Nora Callahan Hartwell. That means you belong to yourself now and to nobody else. I'm only asking for the right to stand beside you. That was the most intimate moment in the life of Silas Hartwell, 31 years old. More than any first night, more than any kiss he had ever known. And Nora knew it, and she only nodded. They sat there a long time, by the fire, with her hands pressed against his chest. Outside, the rain kept on falling. Inside, his heart beat against her fingers, steady and slow. And he did not move, and she did not move, and neither of them spoke. When at last she drew her hands back, her palms were warm. She said, Silas, what time is the council meeting tomorrow? 2 in the afternoon, in the chapel. I want to come with you. He looked at her. He said, Nora, you do not have to. I will speak for you." She shook her head. She said, "A man cannot speak for a woman about a thing that is hers. The word is mine, Silas. I will go with you." He nodded. She climbed the stairs to bed. She did not sleep. She sat on the edge of the small bed and she traced the letters of Nora on her own palm with her fingertip over and over until she fell asleep with her palm against her cheek. Wednesday morning came cold and gray. Silas harnessed the wagon at noon. Nora put on her one good dress, the brown wool one, and her shawl. Hannah, who understood more than any 8-year-old ought to, stood quietly by the kitchen door. Nora knelt in front of her. Nora said, "I will be back tonight, honey, I promise." Hannah said, "Miss Nora, can I come too?" Nora looked up at Silas. Silas said, "Yes, come on, Hannah." They were ready to go, and then, 1 hour before the council meeting, a wagon came up the road. It was not the wagon they were about to take. It was Sheriff Nathaniel Wexford's wagon, and Pastor Callahan was on the seat beside him. And there was a third man in the back of the wagon, a man Nora Hartwell had never seen before. The third man was about 40 years old. He wore a brown waistcoat. His mustache was neatly trimmed. His accent, when he spoke, was the sharp Boston of the South End. He climbed down from the wagon. He pointed straight at Nora, and he said to Sheriff Wexford, "That is my wife. I have been looking for her for 2 years." Nora went still. She shook her head slowly. She said, "I do not know this man. I have never been married before in my life." The man from Boston took a paper out of his coat. Sheriff Wexford took it from him. Sheriff Wexford held it out to Silas. Silas read it. It was a marriage certificate. It read, "Eleanor Catherine Callahan, born the 15th of March, 1859, and Thomas Patrick Finnegan, born the 28th of August, 1841, were joined in holy matrimony on the 12th of August, 1879, at St. Anne's Church, South End, Boston, Massachusetts." The bride's mark was an X. The birth date was correct. The middle name, Catherine, was Nora's grandmother's name. Nobody in the world knew that middle name except Nora herself. Silas looked at Nora. His face went white. Nora said, her voice breaking, "Silas, I swear on the soul of my mother, I have never met this man. I have never signed this paper. I do not know how it can exist. I swear, please." But Silas had already turned away. Sheriff Wexford said, "Mrs. Hartwell, under the law of the Montana Territory, your marriage to Mr. Hartwell is void because you already had a lawful husband on the day you signed the mail-order bride contract. And beyond that, the act of signing a mail-order bride contract while already married is a criminal fraud. You will be held at Mrs. Martha Whitfield's hotel for 3 days. Then you will be escorted back to Boston to stand before a court. Mr. Finnegan is within his rights to take you home with him." Finnegan smiled, a small smile. Nora saw, a beat too late, that it was the smile of a man who had just won. Pastor Callahan stepped forward. His face was grave. He said, "And as for Hannah, the child will be placed at the St. Agatha School in Helena until Mr. Hartwell can establish a proper Christian home again." Hannah, standing in the doorway of the kitchen, burst into tears. Nora was led to the sheriff's wagon. Silas stood on the porch. He did not move. He did not run after her. He did not speak. Hannah pulled at her brother's coat sleeve. She screamed, "Go get her back, Silas! You promised her! You promised!" Silas did not answer. The sheriff's wagon drove away. That night, after Hannah had cried herself to sleep upstairs, Silas Hartwell sat alone by the cold fireplace. He did not light a fire. He took a whiskey bottle from the high cupboard and he drank from it for the first time in 4 years. He looked at the agreement sheet Nora had signed 2 days before, the uneven writing of the word Nora, and he thought, "I trusted a woman who could not read. I let my heart be fooled twice. Mary Ellen died because I was 4 hours too late. Nora fooled me because I was foolish enough to trust an X on a piece of paper." He almost put the agreement in the stove. He did not. At 3 o'clock in the morning, a small hand touched his knee. Hannah stood beside his chair. Her hair was tangled. Her face was still wet with old tears. She was 8 years old, and she was speaking like a grown woman in a small body. She said, "Silas?" He looked at her. She said, "Nora cannot read, but she always knows when I am hurting. She sat up 2 nights with me when I had the fever. She sang me Mama's song. She would not sign anything she did not understand. If there is a paper saying that she did, then somebody is lying, Silas, not Nora." He looked at his sister. Hannah went on. "You read the first contract to her. That is why she stayed with us. You have to read the other paper too, Silas. You have to read it careful, because she cannot." Silas set the whiskey bottle down on the floor. His little sister was right. He had never actually read the Finnegan document. He had only looked at the signature and believed it. He had committed the very sin that his entire marriage to Nora had been built to protect her from. He stood up, he put on his coat, he lit the oil lamp, and he did the only thing he knew how to do. He read the Finnegan marriage certificate by lamplight, slowly, word by word, the way he had read the mail-order bride contract to Nora on their first night. And in 10 minutes, he saw it. The church named on the certificate was St. Anne's Church of the South End of Boston. But Silas had served 2 years as a young man in a Pennsylvania village, and he had known a cousin who had gone to seminary in Boston. There was no St. Anne's Church in the South End of Boston. The South End had St. Peter's. The old Irish Catholic parish that might once have been called St. Anne's had been in the North End, and it had burned to the ground in 1872 and had never been rebuilt. The priest listed on the certificate was a Father Patrick Doyle. Silas pulled down an old Boston Catholic directory from his shelf, one he had kept from his Pennsylvania days. He thumbed through it. His finger stopped. Father Patrick Doyle had died in 1870. 2 years before the date on the marriage certificate, the whole paper was a forgery. Silas sat back in his chair. He said out loud to the empty room, "Dear Lord, what have I done?" Before dawn, he was at the telegraph office in Silver Bend, banging on the window until the clerk, a young man named Benjamin Graves, came down in his nightshirt. Silas paid double rate. He sent 3 telegrams. The first telegram went to the Diocese of Boston. It asked whether Father Patrick Doyle had died in 1870, and if so, on what date. The second telegram went to the Pinkerton Field office in Chicago. It asked whether a man by the name of Thomas Finnegan, age about 40, of the South End of Boston, was known to them. The third telegram went to Father Patrick O'Shea of St. Mary's in the North End of Boston. It asked him whether he would look for hospital records of one Eleanor Catherine Callahan, admitted for scarlet fever at Massachusetts General Hospital in August of 1879, under the care of Dr. Edward Hollis. Then Silas rode to Mrs. Martha Whitfield's hotel. Mrs. Martha Whitfield was 58 years old. She had been a widow for 30 years. She ran the only hotel in Silver Bend, and she did not suffer fools. When Silas came in through the front door with straw in his hair and whiskey on his breath, she folded her arms across her chest and she said, "Silas Hartwell, you look like a man who owes somebody an apology." Silas said, "I do, ma'am." "Is my wife here?" "She is. The sheriff put her in my care yesterday. I did not lock the door. She could have run. She did not. She sat on the bed and she cried for 2 hours. Then she washed her face. Then she said to me, 'Mrs. Whitfield, tell me plainly, do you believe me?' And I looked her in the eye, and I said, 'Child, I do.'" Silas let out a long breath. He said, "Mrs. Whitfield, I need to speak with her." "To speak with—" Mrs. Martha tilted her head to one side. She said, "No, Silas, not yet. You have some thinking to do first. And Nora Hartwell has something she wants to say. To the sheriff, and to Pastor Callahan, and to this whole valley. She is not yet ready to be reconciled to any man. Come back in 2 days." Silas stared at her. Then he nodded. He said, "Yes, ma'am, I will." He turned to leave. At the door, Mrs. Martha said quietly, "Silas, what made you come back?" He said without turning, "I read the paper, like I should have read it from the start." Mrs. Martha Whitfield, 58 years old, 30 years a widow, said, "Good. Then there is hope for you yet." Silas rode home. He did the chores. He fed the livestock. He made Hannah's breakfast. He did not speak very much. Hannah, who understood, did not press him. In the afternoon, Silas sat on the porch with his coffee, and he watched the road. He thought of the second telegram, the one to the Pinkerton office. He was hoping, he was praying, and he was afraid. In Mrs. Martha's hotel, in her small room on the upper floor, Nora Hartwell asked Mrs. Martha for paper, ink, and a pen. Mrs. Martha brought them up on a tray, along with a bowl of beef broth and a slice of fresh bread. Nora said, "Mrs. Whitfield, I cannot write the words, but I will speak them. And if you will be so kind, you will write them down. I want to make a public declaration to the sheriff, to the church council, to the whole town of Silver Bend." Mrs. Martha sat at the little writing desk. She dipped the pen. She said, "Speak, child." And Nora spoke. She said, "My name is Eleanor Catherine Callahan Hartwell. I was born on the 15th of March, 1859, in the city of Boston, Massachusetts. My mother was Margaret Callahan of County Galway. My father's name I do not know. My mother died of consumption in the year 1869. I was 10 years old. From the age of 12, I was raised by Mrs. Bridget Mahoney, a nurse of the Fort Hill district of Boston, until her death in 1877. I have suffered since I was a child of about 7 years old from a condition the doctors in England have named word blindness. When I look at letters on a page, the letters dance. They change places with each other. They do not hold still. Mrs. Mahoney tried for 6 years to teach me to read. She could not. The fault is not of my mind. I have a quick mind. The fault is something in the way my eye and my mind refuse to agree with each other about a printed page. She went on. She said, "I cannot read. I am no longer ashamed of that. I am saying it out loud for the first time in my life in this small room to be written down and to be read to any court or any pastor or any council that wishes to hear it. I cannot read. I have never been able to read. And I have the right as a human being and as a citizen of the United States under the 14th Amendment of its Constitution to have a paper read aloud to me by a person whom I trust before I put my mark to it. And I have the right to be believed when I say I never signed a paper that was never read aloud to me." She took a long breath. She said, "My husband is Silas James Hartwell of the Hartwell Ranch in Silver Bend, Montana Territory. He is the first man in my entire life to read a paper aloud to me. He read the mail-order bride contract aloud to me on the very first night I came to his house, before ever I became his wife. He knew from that first hour that I could not read. He did not laugh at me. He did not pity me. He did not use my weakness against me. He read it to me, word by word. That is why I married him. That is why I stayed." She paused. She said, "I have never married a man named Thomas Finnegan. I have never been to a St. Anne's church in Boston. I have never signed any paper in the year 1879. In August of 1879, I was lying in a bed at Massachusetts General Hospital with scarlet fever. I was unconscious for 3 days. Dr. Edward Hollis was my attending physician. Mrs. Bridget Mahoney sat beside my bed every night. She is dead now, but Dr. Edward Hollis is still alive, in Boston, at 73 years of age. He will remember me. He will swear to it." She looked at Mrs. Martha. She said, "Write that I say this in full knowledge of the Lord and in full ownership of my own name. Eleanor Catherine Callahan Hartwell. Her mark. And below my mark, write my full name, as I have lately learned to write it by the hand of my husband. Nora." Mrs. Martha Whitfield finished writing. She blew on the ink to dry it. She looked across the little desk at Nora. Mrs. Martha said, "Child, when my husband died 30 years ago, this town of Silver Bend accused me of having killed him for the insurance money. A woman named Ruth Finch, whom I hardly knew, stood up before the judge and spoke for me. I have kept that debt for 30 years. This is the day I am finally paying it." She took the declaration. She took a second sheet, and on it she wrote a telegram of her own, addressed to Father Patrick O'Shea at St. Mary's in the north end of Boston, asking him to search the hospital records of Eleanor Catherine Callahan for the month of August, 1879. She paid the $5 wire fee out of her own savings. Nora said softly, "Why do this for me, Mrs. Whitfield?" Mrs. Martha answered, "Because this is my turn, child, and a woman always pays her debts." 2 days later, the answers came back. The first telegram from the Diocese of Boston confirmed that Father Patrick Doyle had died of pneumonia on the 19th of November, 1870. His burial records were on file at Holy Cross Cemetery. The second telegram from the Pinkerton Field Office in Chicago reported that Thomas Finnegan of the South End of Boston was well known to them, but by a different name. His true name was Thomas Flaherty. He had been twice convicted of fraud. He was known to work in concert with one Mrs. Edith Briggs. Mrs. Briggs ran the so-called Briggs Matrimonial Agency as a fraud operation. She matched orphaned illiterate young women with frontier ranchers, and then pursued the ranchers for extortion money by producing false marriage certificates, each one claiming the new bride was already married to Flaherty. 3 similar cases had been documented by the Pinkertons in Wyoming, in Dakota, and in Kansas. The third telegram from Father Patrick O'Shea was the longest of the 3. It confirmed that Eleanor Catherine Callahan had been admitted to Massachusetts General Hospital on the 11th of August, 1879, with severe scarlet fever. She had been unconscious from the 12th to the 14th of August. She could not possibly have signed any document during that 3-day interval. Dr. Edward Hollis was still living. He was now 73 years old. He was prepared to swear a formal affidavit to that effect. The affidavit would follow by post within 10 days. Sheriff Wexford read the 3 telegrams in his office. Silas Hartwell stood on one side of his desk. Mrs. Martha Whitfield stood on the other. Sheriff Wexford took off his hat. He rubbed his eyes with the heel of his hand. He said, "I'm going to arrest Mr. Finnegan, otherwise known as Mr. Flaherty, within the hour. I'm going to wire the Boston Police Department this afternoon to have Mrs. Edith Briggs arrested. And I'm going to ride myself to the St. Agatha School in Helena in the morning to bring Miss Hannah Hartwell home." He looked at Silas. He said, "Mr. Hartwell, I owe your wife an apology, and I will give it to her in person." Silas nodded. He could not speak. Mrs. Martha Whitfield said, "Sheriff, with respect, Nora Hartwell has one more thing to say, and she is going to say it to the church council at their meeting tomorrow night. And I want you there, and I want Pastor Callahan there, and I want Silas Hartwell there, and I want the whole town of Silver Bend there, because that woman has something she has been waiting 12 years to say. And tomorrow night, by God, she is going to say it." Sheriff Wexford nodded. "Yes, ma'am." He stood up. He reached for his hat. He walked to the jail. The next afternoon, Sheriff Wexford rode hard for Helena. He went alone. He rode through the night. He reached the St. Agatha School early the next morning. He stood in the office of the Mother Superior, and he laid out the facts of the case. The Mother Superior, a tired old woman with gentle eyes, listened without interruption. When Sheriff Wexford was finished, she rang a small bell. Hannah Hartwell was brought in. Her face was streaked with 3 days of crying. The Mother Superior said, "Child, this is Sheriff Wexford. He has come for you. You are going home." Hannah did not say anything. She walked across the room to Sheriff Wexford. She put her small hand in his large one. And only then, did she allow herself to cry. Sheriff Wexford rode her back to Silver Bend. The church council of the Silver Bend Presbyterian Church met on a Thursday night in the chapel. There were 9 men on the council, and Pastor Josiah Callahan at the head. Ordinarily, there were no women in the chapel during a council meeting, because women did not sit on church councils in Montana Territory in the year 1881. That night, Mrs. Martha Whitfield walked in through the front doors with Nora on her arm. Mrs. Martha walked straight down the center aisle. She sat them both down in the front pew. She did not ask permission. Behind them, the whole town of Silver Bend filed in, every pew filled. Then people stood against the back wall. Old Caleb Thornton, the Brennan family, father and son, the family of Mr. and Mrs. Graves, Mrs. Bridget Donnelly and her blacksmith husband, the Ramirez family, young Benjamin Graves from the telegraph office, Judge Ezra Whitmore, Dr. Samuel Hollis, they all came. Sheriff Nathaniel Wexford stood at the back with his arms folded across his chest. Silas Hartwell sat in the front pew, across the aisle from Nora. Hannah sat beside him, her small hand in his big one. She had not let go of her brother's hand since he had met her and the sheriff at the edge of town that afternoon. Pastor Callahan, seeing that the chapel was full to the walls, stood up. He cleared his throat. He said, "Brethren, this is a closed meeting of the church council. I must ask the gallery to withdraw." Mrs. Martha Whitfield stood up. She said, loud enough for the whole chapel to hear her, "Pastor Callahan, with respect, you called a meeting to speak of Mrs. Hartwell behind her back. Now Mrs. Hartwell is here, and the town is here to hear what she has to say to her face. We will not withdraw." Pastor Callahan looked at her a long moment. Then he sat back down. He nodded once. He said, "Very well. Mrs. Hartwell, you may speak." Nora stood up. She had her declaration in her hand, but she did not read from it. She had memorized every word over the last 2 days in her small hotel room, out loud, with Mrs. Martha sitting beside her, correcting her cadence. Nora spoke. Her voice was low at first. It grew clearer as she went. She said every word of the declaration. She named herself. She named her mother. She named Mrs. Bridget Mahoney. She named the word blindness. And she said it plain in front of the 9 council members and in front of the whole town of Silver Bend. She named the hospital and the doctor and the date and the 3 days she had lain unconscious while a man in Boston was forging her mark onto a false marriage paper. She named the 14th Amendment, and she said word by word that she was a citizen of the United States of America, and that her citizenship did not depend on whether she could read a Bible. She said, "I have the right to have a paper read to me before I sign it. That is a human right. And any man in this town, rancher or pastor or sheriff or judge, who would sign his name to a paper he had not read is no different from me. The difference between reading the paper myself and having it read to me is not a difference of worth. It is only a difference of method." She turned to face Pastor Callahan. She said, "Pastor Callahan, I do not hate you. You are an honest man, and you believed what you said. But you were wrong. A mother's love for a child is not measured by whether she can read scripture off a page. It is measured by whether she can sit up 2 nights with that child when the fever comes, by whether she can sing the child to sleep in the language that the child's mother sang in, by whether she will kneel before God on that child's behalf when nobody at all is watching. I have done all 3 of those things for Hannah Hartwell in the 8 weeks I have been her mother, and I will go on doing them until the day I am in the ground." She turned to face Silas. She said, "Silas Hartwell, you read the mail-order bride contract to me on the first night I came to your house. On the 3rd night you added a 4th clause that you would read aloud to me every night for the rest of our lives, anything I wished to hear. You have kept that promise. You kept it even on the morning I was taken away to Mrs. Whitfield's hotel, because in the middle of the night, when you might have believed the lie, you went back and you read the true paper. The paper the liars did not want you to read, and you saw what it was." She paused. Her voice broke just slightly. Then she steadied it. She said, "I forgive you for turning away from me on the porch, Silas. I know why you did. 4 years ago, a woman you loved died while you were 4 hours away on a road. You have been punishing yourself for 4 years for one moment of trusting the road more than the woman. When that forged paper came, you heard the same voice in your head. You have no need to be ashamed, my husband. You came back, you read. You came for me. That is all any woman can ask of any man." She turned back to the council. She said, "I am Nora Callahan Hartwell. I am the wife of Silas Hartwell. I am the mother of Hannah Hartwell. I cannot read, and I will not be ashamed of that any longer. You will either accept me as I am, or you will not, but you will not take my child, and you will not take my marriage, and you will not take my citizenship, because those things are mine, and they were given to me not by this council. They were given to me by a higher court, and by a man who sat down beside me on a Thursday night in October, and who read 4 pages of a contract aloud to me by the light of his fire." She sat down. For perhaps 10 seconds, there was no sound in the chapel at all. Then Caleb Thornton, the old ranch hand, stood up from the back row. His face was wet. He said, loud and rough, I stand with Mrs. Hartwell. Dr. Samuel Hollis stood up. He said, I stand with Mrs. Hartwell. Mr. Brennan stood up. His son Thomas stood up beside him. We stand with Mrs. Hartwell. Judge Ezra Whitmore stood up slowly from the pew where he had been sitting. He said, as the judge of this county, and as a Presbyterian, and as a member of this church, I stand with Mrs. Hartwell. One by one, the townspeople of Silver Bend stood up. The Ramirez family, the Donnelly family, the Graves family, Benjamin Graves from the telegraph office, Sheriff Wexford, Mrs. Martha Whitfield, all 9 council members, one after the other. Even Hannah stood on the pew so she would be seen. Pastor Callahan sat a long while looking down at his hands. His town was standing all around him. Then Pastor Callahan stood up too. He walked down the aisle. He stopped in front of Nora. And he did a thing that no one in that chapel had ever seen a Presbyterian pastor do. He knelt down before her. He said, Mrs. Hartwell, I am a man who believed what he was taught, and I did not stop to ask whether what I was taught was right. You taught me something tonight that 52 years of living, and a seminary education besides, had failed to teach me. A soul is not saved by printed letters. A soul is saved by love. Forgive me, if you are able. Nora looked at him a long moment. She said quietly, I forgive you, Pastor, but it will take me 4 weeks to feel the forgiveness as well as to say it. I ask that you bear with me that long. Pastor Callahan nodded. He said, I will. And for those 4 weeks and for the rest of my pastorate, you are welcome in this church, whether or not you ever read a word of my Bible. He rose. He walked back up the aisle, past the sheriff, out of his own chapel, into the cold autumn night. The first snow of winter fell a week after Hannah came home. It was a quiet snow. It fell on a Tuesday night from a low sky without wind, and it laid itself softly over the Hartwell ranch, over the roof of the house, and the roof of the barn, and the shoulders of the old oak tree in the yard. Inside the house, Silas and Nora sat by the fire. Hannah was asleep upstairs. On Silas's knee was a small sandalwood box that Nora had never seen before. He opened it. Inside was a letter folded into 4, the paper yellowed at the edges, the wax seal broken but otherwise whole. Silas said, This is the letter Mary Ellen wrote for me before she died. The midwife put it in my hand 1 hour after I came home, 1 hour after she had gone. I have never opened it. 4 years, Nora. I did not have the courage to open it. Nora looked at the letter. She did not speak. Silas held it out to her. She shook her head. Silas, I cannot read it. He smiled. It was the first smile of the week. He said, I know. That is why I'm giving it to you. I cannot read it alone either. I have been waiting 4 years for somebody who would sit beside me while I read it. Sit beside me, Nora. I will read. Nora sat down next to him on the bench by the fire. She did not take his hand. She only sat close. She looked at the fire, the way Mrs. Mahoney had taught her long ago in Boston to sit beside the dying, not touching, only present. Silas opened the letter. He read it aloud. His voice was rough, but he did not falter. My dearest Silas, if you are reading this, then I am already gone. Do not let the book of your life stop on this page. I beg you, Silas, do not. You will blame yourself for writing to Billings that morning. Do not. Dr. Hollis told me a month ago that my heart had a hole in it from the day I was born. He told me that I should never have tried to carry a child. I did not tell you this, because I wanted so very much to have your child, because I wanted to leave you something of me when I was gone. I was selfish, my love, and I beg your forgiveness for it. I died because of my own choice, not because of your ride to Billings. Silas, listen to me now. You are the best man I have ever known. You have a soul that reads other people from a long way off. Do not let that soul be buried with me. Love again. Find a woman whom the world has not yet learned to value, because you are one of the rare ones who will see her worth. Raise Hannah with the kindness that is in you. Read scripture to the children you are yet to have, the way you read it to me on the nights I was sick. I love you. I have loved you. I will love you, but I want you to love again. That is the last gift I can give to you. The freedom to love again. Your Mary Ellen, always. Silas finished reading. He bent forward. He put his face in his hands. And he wept, for the first time in 4 years, like a child. Nora said nothing. She laid her hand on his back, soft. The way Mrs. Mahoney had laid her hand on the backs of men weeping beside the beds of their wives in the wards of Massachusetts General Hospital. She kept her hand there. When Silas's breath at last steadied, he said, his voice rough, 4 years. 4 years she has been forgiving me, and I did not know, because I did not dare to read. Nora answered softly, I did not know I had dignity either, my love. Not until the night you read the contract to me. There are truths about ourselves we cannot see, not until somebody else reads them aloud to us. That was the full answer of the story. They sat a long time by the fire. The logs shifted, the flame dropped, then caught again. Outside, the snow went on falling, quiet as mercy, over the roof and the barn and the oak tree. After a while, Silas said, Nora, I do not want you to sleep upstairs tonight. Nora looked up at him. He said, Not for that reason. I am not asking for that. I only want you beside me. I have been alone 4 years. I would like for my last thought tonight and my first thought in the morning to be your face on the pillow next to mine. That is all. Nora stood up. She took his hand. They walked together to the bedroom off the kitchen, the one that had been his alone and Mary Ellen's before that. She undressed down to her chemise. He undressed down to his shirt and trousers. They lay side by side on the wide bed. They did not touch except for their hands, which found each other between them in the dark. Silas told her about Mary Ellen. Everything, from the beginning. The things he had never told another living soul. How they met, how he had loved her. What her laugh sounded like. What she used to cook on Sunday mornings. How she used to mispronounce the word magnolia. How she had died. Nora listened. Once in a while she asked a small question. She was not jealous. She understood, with the wisdom that only comes to a person who has lost everything she ever had, that love is not a loaf of bread to be divided. It is a flame. A flame can light another candle without itself going out. When at last Silas had fallen asleep, Nora lay awake a while longer, looking up at the dark ceiling. She whispered in the Gaelic her mother had taught her so long ago, Mrs. Mahoney, I have found a home at last. You were right. I waited, and home came. Then she slept. The winter passed. It was a long winter. Heavy snow in January, a blizzard in February that kept the whole valley in for 6 days. They lived quietly at the ranch, the 3 of them. And then the 4 of them, once Caleb Thornton moved into the small cottage behind the barn for the coldest weeks. They read by the fire at night. Silas read. Nora listened, and sometimes now she would stop him and ask the meaning of a word. She was learning, slowly, by ear mostly, and by the hand, the way Silas had first taught her to write her name. Hannah grew. She was 9 years old that winter. She was learning her own letters at the Silver Bend schoolhouse, and in the evenings she would sit with Nora at the kitchen table and work on them together. Nora would look at a letter. Hannah would look at a letter. Hannah would read it aloud. Nora would trace it with her finger. They learned side by side, a 9-year-old girl and a 22-year-old woman, and neither of them was ashamed. Pastor Josiah Callahan kept his word. The 4 weeks passed, and then 1 more week, and then 1 more. He did not push. In the month of March, Nora sent word to him that she was ready. He came out to the ranch. She served him bread she had baked herself. They did not speak of the old matter. They spoke of Hannah's schooling. When Pastor Callahan rose to leave, he said, Mrs. Hartwell, I was wrong. I will say it as often as you need to hear it. Nora said, Once was enough, Pastor. Come again next Sunday for supper. He did, and so did Mrs. Martha Whitfield. And so did old Caleb Thornton. And so once in a while did the Brennan family, and the Graves family, and Dr. Samuel Hollis. The Hartwell Ranch had become, without anyone quite noticing it happen, a place where people came. And in the first week of April, with the snow melting at last, Silas came to Nora in the kitchen. He took both of her hands in his. He said, "Nora, Father Patrick O'Shea has written. He will ride the rails out from Boston in May if we will have him. He wishes to marry us, properly, in front of the Lord. If you will have me as a husband in the full sense of the word, I would like that very much." Nora looked up at him. She had been learning to read all winter, letter by letter, with Silas and Hannah and her own quiet, stubborn will. She was not yet good at it. She could read short scripture. She could write her own full name. She could sign bank papers. It was enough. She said, "Silas James Hartwell, yes, I will marry you for the second time. And this time I will sign my own name to the paper." He kissed her then, for the first time after a full 6 months of marriage. She kissed him back. Spring came to the Hartwell Ranch in the year 1882. The meadows bloomed with bluebonnet and Indian paintbrush. The sky was so clear that the Absaroka Range stood visible 100 miles to the east. Silas and Nora Hartwell were married for the second time on a Saturday in May, in the small chapel outside of Silver Bend. Father Patrick O'Shea had ridden the rails from Boston across 5 states to perform the service himself. He had written ahead to Nora, as she could not yet read his letter easily, so Silas had read it to her. In the letter, Father O'Shea had said, "It is not every priest who is given the chance to marry a woman he once pulled out of the sanctuary of his church, cold and hungry, and placed on a train west to a husband who turned out to be the kindest man in the Montana Territory. I would not miss this wedding for any cathedral in Rome." Sheriff Nathaniel Wexford stood as witness. He had ridden all the way to Boston himself in December to testify at the trial of Mrs. Edith Briggs and Thomas Flaherty. Both had been convicted. Mrs. Briggs had received 6 years in the state penitentiary. Flaherty, who had 3 prior convictions, had received 12. 3 other illiterate young women, matched through the same fraud operation, had since been located, reunited with their families, and offered compensation by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Mrs. Martha Whitfield stood as Nora's matron of honor. Caleb Thornton stood as Silas's best man, his old hat held over his heart. Hannah, now 9 years old, walked ahead of Nora down the aisle in a white dress with a blue ribbon. She carried a basket of wild mountain lupine. She was the most serious flower girl any of them had ever seen. Pastor Josiah Callahan had not been invited to officiate. He had, however, been invited to attend. He sat in the 3rd pew from the front. He wept openly from the moment Nora appeared at the back of the chapel on Silas's arm. When Father Patrick O'Shea asked Nora to speak her vow, she did not read from a paper. She had memorized every single word over 3 months, by speaking them aloud, by the fire, beside the man who was about to become her husband for the second time. Nora spoke. She said, "Silas James Hartwell, I have not yet read many books. I can read my name. I can read short scripture slowly, and I still make mistakes. I will go on learning for the rest of my life. But I have read you, my love. I read you from the first night you read the contract to me, when you might have used what you knew against me, and you did not. I read the grief you had been keeping for 4 years in a small sandalwood box. I read the love you have for your sister Hannah every single time you tried to braid her hair clumsily. I read your honor when you knelt before me in the hallway of Mrs. Whitfield's hotel in the middle of the afternoon, with everybody watching." She took a breath. She said, "I will make you one promise, Silas Hartwell. I will go on learning to read printed books until the day I die. But I will never stop reading you. Not one day, not 1 hour, until I am dead. And after I am dead, if the Lord will allow me to wait on the far shore, I will wait there for you, and I will read you again, for as long as eternity lasts." Silas could not get his prepared vow out. He looked at her. He nodded. He said one sentence, because one sentence was enough. He said, "Nora, I read the contract to you once. Now I will read your whole life to you, I promise." Father Patrick O'Shea, weeping, said, "By the power vested in me by the Lord and by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and acknowledged here by the Montana Territory, I pronounce you husband and wife for the second time, and this time forever." They signed the certificate. Silas signed Silas, James Hartwell, in his steady hand. Nora wrote, slowly, clearly, one letter at a time. Nora Catherine Hartwell. The letters were still a little uneven, but they were from her own hand, not an X. The chapel was silent for about 10 seconds. Then Hannah, sitting in the front pew, clapped her hands once, and the whole chapel clapped with her. Caleb Thornton wept. Mrs. Martha Whitfield wept. Father Patrick O'Shea wept. Pastor Josiah Callahan wept the hardest of any of them. Dr. Samuel Hollis wept. Judge Ezra Whitmore blew his nose hard and pretended he had caught a cold. Silas did not weep. He had wept himself empty the night of Mary Ellen's letter. He had no tears left for this one. But his hand trembled when he slid the ring onto Nora's finger. There was a dance at the ranch that evening. Everybody came. Caleb Thornton played the fiddle. Benjamin Graves played the spoons. Mrs. Martha Whitfield had brought 3 pies. The Ramirez family had brought tamales. Mrs. Donnelly had brought soda bread. The Graves family, who had very little to spare, had brought a bowl of wild berries they had picked themselves that morning. Nora danced with Silas first, then with her father-in-law of sorts, old Caleb, then with Pastor Callahan, who was a stiff dancer but a patient one, then with Father Patrick O'Shea, who laughed like a boy, then with Hannah, who had insisted on a turn. When the sun finally set behind the Absaroka Range, the lamps were lit on the porch. The music went on until almost midnight. That night, for the first time, Silas and Nora Hartwell were husband and wife in the full sense of the word. He was gentle. She was brave. Neither of them hurried. When it was done, she lay against his shoulder and she cried a little. Not from pain, from something on the other side of pain. He held her. He did not say anything. He did not need to. She did not need him to. Outside the open window, a Montana night in May was singing softly with spring crickets. They slept. The first year of their true marriage went by fast. Nora's reading continued to grow. She read her first whole newspaper in the month of July out loud, to Silas and to Hannah at the supper table, and she only had to stop for help on 4 words in the entire front page. Silas clapped for her. Hannah cheered. Nora blushed, then laughed, then clapped for herself. The schoolhouse was Silas's idea, though he always said later that it was Nora's. It was in the fall of 1882 that Mrs. Inez Ramirez, a young Mexican widow whose husband had died in a copper mine accident near Butte, came to the Hartwell Ranch looking for work. Nora hired her to help in the vegetable garden. Within 2 weeks, Nora realized that Mrs. Ramirez could not read English. Within 3 weeks, Nora had sat Mrs. Ramirez down at the kitchen table in the evenings and had begun, haltingly, to teach her the letters, using the same method Silas had used on her. By the month of December, word had spread. Mrs. Bridget Donnelly, the blacksmith's wife, first-generation Irish, came to ask if she could also learn so that she might finally write letters to her younger sister back in Galway. Nora said yes. Then Mrs. Lillian Graves came. Mrs. Lillian Graves was 50 years old. She had been born into slavery in Georgia in the year 1837. She had been freed in 1863. She had come west in 1864, been freed in 1863. She had come west in 1875. She had never once in 50 years of life opened a Bible and read a word of it. Nora said yes. Silas said to his wife over the supper table in January of 1883, "You need a schoolroom. You cannot keep teaching these women in our kitchen. I am going to build you one." Nora said, "Silas, you have 300 head of cattle to mind." Silas said, "I will build it in the evenings. It will take a little while, but I will build it." He built it. He built it over the course of that winter and the spring that followed. A small log building next to the horse barn. It had 8 desks, a slate blackboard, a wood stove, a lamp on every desk, a window looking out at the mountains. On the 1st of June, 1883, the Hartwell Schoolhouse for Women opened its doors. And that was the beginning of the second half of their lives together. 5 years passed. It was autumn again, in the year 1887. 6 years to the day since the night a rancher had read a 4-page contract to a woman he had just met at the Silver Bend train station. The Hartwell Ranch now ran 300 head of cattle. It had 15 horses in the barn. It had the largest vegetable garden in Silver Bend. But none of these things were what Silas Hartwell and his wife were most proud of. What they were most proud of stood in the small log schoolhouse next to the horse barn. There were 8 students in the year 1887. Mrs. Inez Ramirez, now 35, the Mexican widow, had learned to read English well enough to read her own lease and her own grocery bills. She was the oldest student in terms of time at the school. She had lately begun to help Nora teach the newer students. She had told Nora the spring before that she wanted to become a teacher herself, and Nora had said, "Mrs. Ramirez, you already are one. Ready." Mrs. Bridget Donnelly, the blacksmith's wife, 28 years old, was writing long letters to her sister in Galway twice a month. She had also started to read the Boston newspapers, which she had subscribed to for her own amusement, and she often reported on Irish affairs at supper in a strong voice that embarrassed her shy husband. Mrs. Lillian Graves, now 55, was reading the Bible for herself. She had started in Genesis, and she had made it through to the book of Judges. She read slowly. She read carefully. She said the word of each verse aloud, one at a time, and then she said them all together, as a full sentence, as if she were tasting each sentence before she swallowed it. Nora had once told Silas late at night, "When I watch Mrs. Graves learn the letter M, I see the whole history of the human race in that one letter. M does not belong only to me. It belongs to every single human being who was ever forbidden to read." Silas had no answer for that. He only held her hand. There was a young woman named Blue Thrush, who was 22 years old, of the Apsaalooka Crow people. She had come to the school the year before to learn English, so that she might serve as an interpreter between her people and the county government in the matter of the grazing treaties. Nora did not teach her the way a white woman teaches a native woman. Nora taught her the way 2 women learn a foreign language side by side, each of them the student of the other. Blue Thrush taught Nora the Apsaalooka language in return. The 2 of them had become close friends. On the first day that Blue Thrush had come to the schoolhouse, Nora had said to her, "I know no word of your language. You know few of mine. Let us begin as equals." Blue Thrush had laughed. She had said, "That is not how most white women begin." And there were 4 other students, mail-order brides from other states, who had arrived in Montana Territory only to find that their new husbands were not of Silas Hartwell's kind. Nora had taken them in. She had helped them find honest work. 2 of them had divorced. 1 had reconciled. 1 had remained a student permanently. Silas was the head teacher. He taught free of charge. He taught in the same way that he had first taught Nora, by hand, by voice, slowly, without judgment. Nora was the organizer. She was the keeper of the safety of the room. She did not permit a student to be laughed at, ever. Not when they read a word wrong. Not when their accent broke a word into a funny shape. Not when they mistook one letter for another. The one rule Nora had written on the wall of the schoolhouse, with Silas helping her to spell it, read like this: "In this room no one laughs at anyone, because every single one of us was once the one who did not know." Hannah Hartwell was 14 years old in the autumn of 1887. She was preparing for the entrance examination to the nursing school in Helena. She wanted more than anything in the world to follow in Nora's footsteps and become a nurse. 3 years before, she had stopped calling Nora by the name Miss Nora. She now called her simply Sister. The Hartwell family had 2 new children. The first was Daniel Silas Hartwell. He was 4 years old. He had his mother's auburn hair and his father's gray eyes, and he had a laugh that could be heard from the front porch clear out to the barn. The second was Mary Eleanor Hartwell. She was a year and a half old. She had her mother's blue-gray eyes. She was named, at Nora's own asking, for the first wife of Silas Hartwell. Silas had wept the day Nora had suggested the name. He had said, "Nora, you do not have to." Nora had said, "She gave you to me, Silas. I owe her something. Naming one of our children for her is the very least I can do." And on a Saturday afternoon in October of the year 1887, 6 years to the day from the night a rancher had read aloud a 4-page contract to a mail-order bride who could not read it herself, Silas Hartwell sat on the porch of his ranch house with a cup of black coffee cooling in his hand, and he looked out over the yard. Nora was sitting under the old oak tree, the oak that Mary Ellen had planted the year Silas had first married her. The oak that now stood 7 meters tall. Daniel was asleep in his mother's lap. Mary Eleanor sat beside her mother, playing with the heads of some late wildflowers. Nora was reading a book, slowly, her finger moving along the line of words. Silas stood. He walked down off the porch. He sat beside her on the grass. He did not speak for a full minute. Then he asked softly, "What are you reading, my love?" Nora looked up. Her eyes were bright. She said, "Mary Ellen's letter, the 17th time. But this is the first time I have read it all by myself, without asking you to read it to me. I wanted to thank her, Silas, for leaving you to me, and for forgiving you before I ever stepped off that train." Silas did not answer. He took her hand, the small hand that once could not hold a pen, the hand now calloused anew from the teaching and the letter-writing she did for her students and their families. He kissed her fingers one at a time, from the little finger to the thumb. 5 kisses, unhurried. Then Silas said, "Nora, do you know a thing?" Nora said, "What, my love?" Silas said, "The night you first stepped down off that train. I thought I was meeting a wife. I did not know I was meeting the rest of my life. I did not know I was meeting a schoolhouse. I did not know I was meeting 8 women the world had thrown away. I rode out to that station with nothing in my pocket but a folded 4-page contract. I thought it was a small thing." Nora smiled. She said, "And you read that contract aloud to me, Silas. You did not know that night that you were reading the lives of many people. You only knew it was the right thing to do. But every time you read to me, I remembered. And now I read those same words back to my students. You read to me. I have read to 8. And someday those 8 will read to 80. That is how a story does not end, my love. It just keeps being read." Silas laughed. For the first time in his life, he laughed all the way through, without the shadow of Mary Ellen on the laugh, without the shadow of the Billings Road, without the shadow of any winter that had passed. He put his arm around Nora. Daniel woke up in his mother's lap. Daniel looked up at his father and said, "Papa, what are you going to read to me tonight?" Silas looked down at his son. He said, "What would you like to hear, son?" Daniel thought about it for a long moment, in the very serious way a 4-year-old thinks about things. Then he said simply, "Papa, I want to hear the story of how you met Mama." Silas looked at Nora. Nora smiled at him. Silas lifted Daniel onto his knee. He took a breath. He began. He said, "Once upon a time, there was a woman who took a train all the way out to Montana Territory. She carried nothing with her but a worn leather valise and a paper she could not yet read. And there was a man who stood on the train platform with his little sister named Hannah, and the man had a folded paper in the pocket of his coat. The man did not know that afternoon that his whole life was about to change on account of that paper. He only knew that he had made a promise to read it to the woman, out loud, word, by the light of a fire, that very night. And when the woman stepped down off the train, the man saw that she was very small and very tired and very brave. And he knew in the first moment he saw her that he was going to keep his promise to her no matter what, because she had traveled a long way to reach him, because she had nobody else, and because a promise is what a man is, son. A promise is all he really is." Silas's voice grew soft. Nora laid her head against her husband's shoulder. The sun began to go down slowly behind the Absaroka Range. The light on the oak leaves turned gold. Mary Eleanor laughed at something only a 1.5-year-old child can see. Somewhere in the small log schoolhouse next to the horse barn, a candle was already burning, because Mrs. Lillian Graves was staying late that evening to practice the letter M by herself. Silas went on. He said, "And when the man and the woman reached the ranch house that night, the man took the paper from his pocket. He set it on the table between them by the fire, and he said very slowly so that the woman could hear every word, 'I am going to read this contract to you, every word of it. I want you to know what you have signed. And if there is anything in it that you do not agree with, I will tear this paper up tonight, and you will owe me nothing." And the woman sat down, and she listened, and the man read. He read for a long time. He stopped after every clause. He explained what the words meant in plain English. When he was finished, he passed her the pen. She made her mark. It was an X, but it was an X she made knowing exactly what she had agreed to. And that, son, that was the first night the woman had ever been treated in her whole life as if her understanding mattered. And that was the first night the man had ever been a man truly, in his own eyes, since the day his first wife had died. Daniel had gone very quiet. He was listening to his father with the whole of his small being. Silas went on. He said, "The woman and the man lived at the ranch through a hard autumn, and a harder winter and a beautiful spring. They learned each other slowly, the way you learn a new language, by hand, by ear, by sitting close to each other by the fire every evening. The man read, the woman listened. Then after a while, the woman began to read too, slowly, letter by letter, one word at a time. Her eyes were not like other people's eyes. The letters did not hold still for her, but her hand remembered what her eye could not. And so the woman learned, and the man was patient, and the sister of the man, Hannah, learned alongside them both, and they became a family. Nora quietly took her husband's free hand in her own, and she held it. Silas said, "There was a bad time in the middle, son. There was a bad man who came with a false paper, and there was a good man, the pastor of the town, who had the wrong idea about what made a soul precious to God. For a little while, it looked as though the woman would lose her husband and lose her child and be sent back across the country in chains. But the good people of the town stood up for her. Old Mrs. Whitfield, who had once needed somebody to stand up for her, did the standing. And the sheriff, who had been fooled at first, rode to Helena himself to bring Hannah home. And the pastor, who had been sincere but wrong, knelt down in his own church and asked the woman's forgiveness. And the woman forgave him, because she had been forgiven herself. And because forgiving a man who has wronged you is the most powerful thing a human being can do in this world. And the man of the story, who had once for a single terrible hour doubted his wife, read the false paper for himself at 3 a.m, and when he read it, he saw the lies. And he wired Boston. And he went to the hotel where his wife was being held, and he knelt down before her in the hallway. And he said, "I read the contract to you on our first night. But when somebody handed me a paper saying you had lied to me, I did not read. Forgive me. Not because I deserve it, but because Hannah needs you home, and I need you more than I dare to say." Silas stopped. The light was almost gone now. Mary Eleanor had crawled over and laid her small head against Nora's other side. Daniel's eyes had gone heavy. Daniel said softly, "Papa, what happened after that?" Silas said, "After that, son, the man and the woman were married for the second time in a little chapel by a priest who had come all the way from Boston. And the woman signed her own full name to the marriage paper. And 5 years went by, and 2 children were born, one of them named after the man's first wife, because the woman of the story was that kind of woman, and the woman built a schoolhouse where she taught other women to read, and the man taught beside her. And on a Saturday afternoon in October, 6 years exactly after the first night by the fire, the man and the woman sat together under the old oak tree in their yard, and the man told this very story to his son. And his son listened with his whole heart. And the son grew up to tell the same story to his own children. And that is how the story went on and on and on. Daniel was asleep. Nora was smiling into Silas's shoulder. Her eyes were wet, but her mouth was smiling. Silas said very softly now, more to the air than to any of them, "That is all love ever was in this world. One human being sitting down beside another human being, and reading aloud what the other one could not read alone. That is all love ever needed to be, from the start of time until the end of it." Nora turned her face up to him. She said quietly, "Silas?" "Yes, my love. Thank you for reading to me that first night." Silas kissed her forehead. He said, "Thank you, Nora, for listening." They sat there a long time, under the oak tree, with their two small children asleep against them, and with the light going slowly out of the western sky. A candle burned in the schoolhouse window. A lamp burned in the kitchen of the ranch house where Hannah, 14 years old, was reading aloud to herself from her nursing textbook, practicing for the Helena examination. The old oak tree stood tall above them all. The story that had begun one Thursday afternoon in October of the year 1881, with a rancher reading a contract aloud to a mail-order bride who could not read it herself, was still being read. It would go on being read. In a different house, in a different year, in a different language perhaps for the students of Nora's students and their students after them. But it would be the same night, the same gift, the same simple, rare, holy thing. One person reading to another. That was how the Hartwell family had begun. That was how love, in the best of all its forms, always began. And on the porch of the ranch house, as the first star came out over the Absaroka Range, Silas Hartwell carried his small sleeping son inside. Nora Hartwell carried her small sleeping daughter in close behind him. The lamp in the kitchen burned warm. The schoolhouse candle burned across the yard. Hannah looked up from her textbook and smiled at them both as they came in. And Silas said to the whole of his household, "Time for bed. I will read to you all before you sleep." And that is exactly what he did. This work of fiction is a product of the author's imagination. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, events or locales, is purely coincidental. The narrative is intended solely for artistic and entertainment purposes and should not be interpreted as a reflection of real individuals or factual occurrences.
Now that the story has come to its end, sit with me for just a few moments longer. Because every story worth telling leaves something behind in the heart of the listener. And this one, dear friends, leaves more than most. The story you have just heard is not, in the end, about a mail-order bride. It is not about a contract on 4 folded pages. It is not even about a lonely rancher in Montana territory. It is about something older than all of those things. It is about what happens when one human being chooses, in a small, quiet moment, to treat another human being as if her understanding matters. Silas Hartwell could have laughed. He could have used what he knew against her. He could have taken her silence as permission to lead her wherever he pleased. Instead, on a cold October night, by the light of his own fire, he chose to read 4 pages of paper aloud to a woman who had nothing left in the world but the clothes on her back. And in that one choice, he gave Nora Callahan the first real gift of her entire life. He gave her dignity. That is the first lesson of this story. Dignity is not something a person is born with, or something the world hands down from on high. Dignity is something we give to one another every single day, in the smallest of ways. A door held open, a word read aloud, a hand laid softly on a shoulder, a promise kept when no one is watching. The second lesson is this: the worth of a human being is never measured by what she can read on a page. It is measured by whether she can sit up 2 nights with a feverish child, whether she can save an old man's life with nothing but a reed and steady hands, whether she can forgive the man who once for a single terrible hour doubted her, whether she can kneel before God on behalf of a child who is not her own, when nobody in this world is looking. These are the true measures of a soul. These are the things that cannot be forged on any certificate, or taken away by any counsel, or erased by any lie. And the third lesson, the one that may travel with you longest, is this: the smallest act of kindness you do today is never just for the one who receives it. Silas read to 1 woman. That woman later read to 8. Those 8 will someday read to 80, and on, down the years. The goodness you plant in one human being's life does not stay in that one life. It moves outward like light from a single candle in a dark room until the whole room is warm. So tonight, before you sleep, ask yourself gently, who in your life cannot read the paper they have signed? Who needs you to sit down beside them and read it aloud? Who is waiting, quietly, for one person to treat them as if their understanding matters. Find that person and read to them. That is all love ever was. That is all love will ever need to be.